Hi there, my name's Raghav and this is Deep Focus. I'm joined by Tom.
Hello.
And Kieran.
Hello.
And today we're talking about Ghost in the Shell.
The story centers around a life form that evolves from the internet, seeking asylum in a cybernetic human host.
Alright, so brilliant. So what were your thoughts, initial thoughts on Ghost in the Shell?
Well, initial thoughts
Yeah.
complicated because that was about 13 years ago, but watching it again in the last couple of weeks, it's shocking how good it is, because it's all about the integration, forward thinking of AI and cyborg cynetics, maybe.
These,
What?
like transhumanism kind of
integrated into society.
Yeah.
And the way people react to that, and the way these new intelligences that have half cyborg, half human brains together find an identity and survive in the world. And watching it as more of a professional more recently, the imagery and stuff of the film is amazing.
Yeah,
and
I think that you point that out. You watched it 13 years ago,
a long time ago,
and you said it hasn't aged. I think that's because, again, I only watched it in the last couple of weeks, but I think because of the way I couldn't tell it was made 13 years ago, because it's one of those art styles which just doesn't age, because it's like, you know, when you play a video game like an older one, especially with Nintendo, where it's not realistic, it's not trying to emulate real life, and usually those end up getting dated the quickest, because as soon as the next kind of step in animation or whatever it is, it just looks outdated. So yeah, I think it's one of those things which will kind of retain its look, so to speak. And what about you? What are your initial thoughts?
It's a beautiful film,
Yeah.
and anime is always very beautiful. It's very much like Akira in terms of
Yeah.
I think Akira's prettier in terms of visuals, but this was a very pretty film. Even because it uses quite a bit of CGI as well.
Yeah,
but it doesn't feel dated.
Yeah,
so that's still very.
There's some 3D modeling here and there, but it generally
but it doesn't feel like I felt like, oh, that looks bad.
Yeah, no, there's
for me consistently. I think there's too much exposition story-wise. I think there's a lot of talking, and it's just someone flapping their mouth.
So I think
when it's moving, it's really very pretty.
So let's go on to I guess we're talking about the visuals. What are your, visually, how can you, what is special about Ghost in the Shell, which really, makes it its own?
It's the use of reflection and visual metaphors all the way through. You've got the river and the city, just the opening sequence of the creation of a cyborg, and her waking up in her apartment is just like such a solid setup for the rest of the film, after you've had that little pre-credits action piece. And the whole film just follows that constant, it's sort of bashing you over the head with it, really, of like, this is the story that we're telling, and we've got loads of reflections in every way. People are, there's mirrors in almost every indoor scene. There's water in almost every outdoor scene, and it's so cohesive in its visual storytelling, which is why you make an anime, because you can do that. You
can control it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And you can't really do that with anything. Any live action, or it's really difficult to.
Yeah.
So that is what is special about it. It's just the constant.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the great things about animated films and anime is that, because that each and everything had to be drawn, someone had to be like, I'm going to put that in there. Whereas with film, perhaps, something in the background was not intended to be there. There's a lot more control. You can tell that this is, almost what they saw in their mind translated into an image. So I think there's a great amount of control, and you can see that kind of, especially I thought the great thing with the visuals was the color. You really get the sense of this kind of cyberpunk dystopian kind of feel. It almost felt like the first, I think one of the opening shots is because I don't want to butcher the name, Kasunagi, I think. She's standing over the city, and it feels, for me, it felt a lot like Blade Runner. Just the visual stuff, It felt like that kind of dystopia.
Obviously, The Matrix was like heavily inspired.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting, because obviously being animated, we were like, oh, you couldn't do this in live action. But I think The Matrix sort of did a very good job of replicating the visual aesthetic of Ghost in the Shell
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
obviously,
to
in
an
Ghost of the Shell,
extent.
we've got that screen bending like technique.
Yeah, I think I don't think the kind of colors and the
but
setting
Yeah.
really translated into the Matrix
no,
that much.
but in terms, like there's certainly like parallels.
Yeah, like the green
the Matrix
text.
did a good job
Yeah.
of like sort of
Yeah,
yeah.
it's the
very
same. It's the same
animated,
kind of
actually. And
you
you've
know,
got, like, the animatrix
thematic
and stuff.
gore
Yeah.
as well.
But yeah,
It's about like existentialism essentially.
yeah.
But yeah, so what were your thoughts on the whole kind of visual outside of the Matrix link? Visually, you know, what were your thoughts?
What on the visuals?
Yeah, like just
Oh, yeah.
did it look, how did it
Film.
move?
Yeah, like I said, yeah, when it's moving, it's fantastic. But then obviously there's a lot of bits where it's just
Yeah.
people talking and it's just mouth flapping.
I do think
But,
one of the big issues I had with the film was when the people were just talking, it was a very static feel,
yeah.
and I felt like there were some bits which were great where they're in a car and she's doing a gun up and all that,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
someone's driving and the whole world just moving by.
Yeah.
I thought that was very good. It's
That's
very,
nice,
That's
yeah.
nice, but there's a lot of bits when they're like in an elevator and
yeah,
it looks like nothing's moving,
Yeah.
and sometimes you can feel the limitations,
yeah,
that the practical limitations of animation, where I felt sometimes they were cutting away to things just because it was easier to animate. So there's one bit where they especially the start of the film, I felt this, where there's a lot of chatter, but they just cut away to static things.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's not very interesting looking at this thing for about
No.
7 seconds or 8 seconds. It just felt like they were just cutting away to you know, have less to animate essentially. It felt sometimes very still, but obviously, like you said, when it gets to the action, it's very dynamic. Everything's fast moving.
But
There's
even
lots
when
of movement.
It is beautiful. Like
It is, yeah,
they're
no,
like,
don't get me wrong, yeah.
the sceneries are like paintings in
Yeah,
themselves.
I don't think it's a bad looking film. I just think sometimes it just
Yeah.
moves very slowly. It
Yeah.
kind of tanks its pace a bit, but yeah,
I completely disagree though. 'Cause
Okay, yeah.
I think that is the film's charm, and
Yeah.
it really is a character piece about identity. It's not an action film.
Yeah.
So there's the bits where people are talking, like the bit on the boat, like it moves around enough to keep you interested, and it's more sort of going for, obviously it's not going for it, but it's a Wes Anderson-y style of filmmaking, of long open wide shots. And I think if it was a live action you would forgive it for that, but because it's an animation
Yeah.
they've chosen it, that maybe I feel like you're discounting
Yeah.
it slightly, and those are the bits that tell the story and they are
Yeah.
the piece.
I thought
That's what the story is about.
I thought the bit on the boat was that was a great scene, and I like the way, especially with the dialogue, they really play with background and foreground characters,
Yep.
and never really just next to each other. They're always, you know, one's over there, one's over there. They're talking across planes, and I thought that adds a great like visual element, and I thought that looked great.
And the cutaway things, most of them are all key to the story.
Yeah.
They're all like looking at, you know, like this, the scene where she's going to work. Everything it cuts away to has a relevance to the story and is easier to animate at the same time.
Yeah.
Like when you focus on a bit of rubbish in the river, like that's integral to the story in the visual storytelling.
Yeah, and it builds the whole world.
And it's just her going through the, so you know.
Okay, yeah.
So that's how I feel about
Fair
that
enough.
personally.
Yeah, I mean, the only issue, I just sometimes felt that it was a bit still, but I guess it adds this kind of contemplative, like kind of somber feel to it, which I can tell the film was going for. It's very much more, like you said, it's a much character piece, and it's about these people trying to figure out, you know, what is it essentially to be human. That brings me on to the kind of whole theme of the film, which is, you know, from what I understood, what is it to be human. So what are your thoughts on that whole kind of...
It's a dense film, and I have to be honest, a lot of it flew over my head. I think it's something I have to watch multiple times to really understand it. Because I just felt there was a lot of exposition, and there was there is a lot of chatter, and I was just sort of like I was trying to engage with it. I was just like, but I couldn't. Yeah. There's nothing not taken away from the film, but I feel like as well as that, much like Akira, I feel like they sort of they don't really have much time to establish the world. It sort of just throws you in, because it's kind of like they're kind of like, oh, you read the manga, so you know like what's going on, and it's kind of like, oh, but I'm not quite sure what's happening.
Yeah, I actually quite like the fact that they just kind of throw you in. I respect that, because as a viewer, it just engages me more, because I'm figuring it out naturally rather than someone. There were, like you said, there were bits.
It's not like saying like, oh, this is them and that's what they do, but it's kind of like I just feel like there's like a whole chunk of information I wasn't told when I started watching.
Yeah, it does take a
if
couple
I
of
read the
minutes.
manga, I probably would have Got it.
The manga's not actually that much more detailed.
Is it not any
it's
more
a
detailed?
really concise story. Yeah, they changed very little. It's not like
because I know Akira was like volumes. And they condensed it into like an hour and a half.
No, it's only I think it's only 9 volumes. The original like story of and it pretty much follows it beat for beat. I think. The bit at the beginning is out of place, and there's like another little scene that's out, like the dumper truck scene might be out of place, but apart from that, it's. It's pretty.
Maybe I'm just like.
rock
I'm not smart enough.
It's not supposed to be. It's kind of like Star Wars, where it doesn't give you anything. It just has stuff in the background, and it has this in the background, and there's an entire world out there, but you don't know what it is or what it's.
I did like that. I respect that. It just kind of because I was figuring it out, but at the same time there were lots of exposition where, for instance,
it's a dense. Like I think probably that's why Star Wars is forgivable because it's not as dense as this. Like Star Wars isn't confronting big issues like Ghost in the Shell. So that's why Star Wars like not save the princess, destroy the Death Star, fine. But this is like what is it to be human? It's like, it's like not, C-3PO is not that like, what's it like to be human? What does coffee taste like? Or anything?
But so along the same lines, what did you think about like the dialogue and just that kind of the dialogue essentially?
The dialogue's good. It's interesting watching the subbed version rather than the dubbed version.
Oh yeah, I watched both. The subbed bit.
I've only really watched the dubbed version, but I've toyed with the subbed a bit, and it sort of lends slightly different emotions to everything, and
the dialogue is very different.
Yeah, and I feel like it's a bit more animated, like it's got more emotion to it in the subbed version. Because it's more true to the original.
The subs are usually better anyway.
Yeah, generally, and but I think it's good. I feel like it engages me and does a good job of hiding what we are actually supposed to be looking out for. Like you're listening to the different stories between people, like Bato and that, and it and the with Section 9. All that is kind of it feels a little bit forced in the dubbed version, whereas in the sub it feels more natural and it seems to flow better.
The only issue this is a personal issue, not an issue with the film itself. With I don't know, Tom. But for me, I always find it very difficult to read emotion in sub versions because a lot of it's during voice, and when you're listening to a foreign language, it's very difficult for especially because you're reading it. The intonations are, I guess, different, and I find it difficult personally to be able to read. Is this person angry or surprised? That kind of thing. But I do prefer the dialogue in the subbed version. That's for sure. But yeah, I did the dialogue. There were points where it was quite exposition heavy, especially the puppeteer or puppet master. Sorry. He his most of his dialogue is essentially exposition and just kind of throwing the theme out there, and then the other character's going to chew on it or just confront it. But
he doesn't have that many lines.
Yeah, exactly. He's got two major.
Yeah, and he's also. I don't know if it is a he. He identifies as a he. So
it sounds like a he.
Yeah, and but he's supposedly just found his own existence and has the ability. So he's not unlike our main character. He's not in depth with human conversation and things. So I think there is a glimmer of allowance for that, and it could, if you had a TV show or something, you could work that into it in a way. But it is 100. But he is also like the Holy Grail and the antagonist at the same time.
Yeah, it is wrong.
So and he only has a certain amount of lines, so it's gonna be exposition no matter what.
There's a lot of because the whole character, the puppet master, is revealed to be a program essentially to control people here and there.
Yeah.
And obviously, in doing so, they created the puppet master as we see him in the film. But towards the end, obviously, the story's focused on either killing him and saving him at the same time. Some characters want to kill him, some characters want to save him, or find out more about him, essentially. And I thought I liked that kind of element where, because the last few scenes are very tense. Because it's a very relatively short film. It's only about
88 minutes.
Yeah, it's like I think it's around 80 because on
82.
I think 82 minutes. Perfect. Yeah. So it's actually quite relatively short. And it's quite nice in that way. Like I watched another film a couple of weeks ago called The Slow West, and that's only like just hitting 80 minutes. And I don't know, I quite like the whole kind of short films. It just kind of throws you into this idea. You know, it's very focused. There's nothing really extraneous. Everything's very focused. Yeah, exactly. There's no fat. This is what you came to watch. This is where the story is. They're not wasting time with love interests and garbage about whatever
rubbish,
literally whatever. It's about the film itself. So I quite like that. So we talked about what about editing, because I think the film has a very interesting kind of editing style, which is that it's very it doesn't cut that often. So
no.
Yeah, I think you edit some stuff.
There's lots of montages.
There are,
film, lots of montages. But it's good because it's showing you it's set in Japan, Tokyo. So it's showing you what the world is like.
Yeah, there's a great montage where they show clips, little bits of the world, and they kind of fill that. And I thought that was a really lovely, well animated.
And everything is important. And again, with the reflections, kind of it just adds to that.
Yeah,
rain and puddles.
And
reflections.
And a lot of the time it does the sort of pullback method that if there's ever sort of more than two characters, it will show like some of them for like a third of the scene, and then pull back and show another set for the next third, and then pull back even further and show the rest. And maybe it's just because of the films I watch, and 2001: A Space Odyssey, and like those sort of slower, more in-depth dialogue pieces. I'm not like, I get alarmed when I see like Transformers and 100,000 edits in 14 minutes. So it never bothers me, and I don't have an issue with slow editing. And,
I personally, I do prefer it. For me, cutting is just it kind of,
because each shot has to convey information. Like every shot has to have a purpose, and sometimes one shot can cover a whole scene and it covers all the information you need. But if you keep cutting, you just start having to come up with new meanings for every shot. It's like, oh well, this shot's for that and then this shot's for that. It's like, well,
like what I said earlier, they talk between background and foreground. They don't cut between them. They just show that's the scene and it's in the wide, and they're just talking, and you don't need to cut to their close up for each line.
Saying she's there, he's there.
Yeah, like I was watching
conversation. That's the information of the scene. That's what you're.
I was watching an episode of Game of Thrones recently where there are two characters on horseback just walking along, and every sentence, regardless of whether it's the same person saying it, they just cut to a different angle. And I was like, you don't need to do that, because there's a perfectly good shot of these two people on horseback coming towards a camera, but it kept cutting and cutting and cutting. But this film felt really restrained, and I quite like that element to it. But yeah, I like you've made me come around to the whole concept. The stillness really adds to it now, and I see with the editing, it's built into that whole purpose of
and following like an editor's thought as well. We our main character is a cyborg, so maybe they're only restrained by the concept of time of human beings. So realistically, if they stood in a room for 100 years, they'd be fine. Whereas so the editing is at the pace that the film needs to be at, and it's only the humans watching it that would ever cause an issue. So it's sort of like you could draw that as another metaphor to go along with.
For a robot, that film is just cutting all the time. It's ridiculous. But yeah, I thought, so editing wise, I really like that kind of slow editing. But
and then in the fight scenes, it does speed up, and it does. But it is also still constrained in the same way, like when they're chasing the
dump truck.
Not the dump truck, but the guy who's enlisted the dump truck person.
Oh yeah.
And it sort of cuts from side to side and things like that, and it sort of follows the rest of the medium of having like 2 or 3 shots to each location.
Yeah.
Like the market and then the corridor, they both only have 2 angles in them, and then it gets to like the final set piece at the end with the invisible battle. Yeah. And again, it's the same thing
in the market. Yeah.
And then they're still following the reflections of the water, and it just keeps rolling over.
It's a very like we said, it's very focused film. They know what their like visual motifs are. They know what their world is. It's like you said, it's just not a lot of fat, and I really admire that in a film where it's just, it doesn't feel like it has to be everything to everyone. It's just, this is what it is, this is the story, and it's great. So anyway, any final thoughts on the film as a whole, or any thoughts you had left
the
there?
end bit being in a natural history museum and the imagery of all the skeletons and things on the walls, and the tree of life and the invisible spider tank. I love that whole imagery and the way it played out and everything. That was that's such a good,
very interesting
end bit.
contrast.
Yeah, and then the extremely confusing scene at the end, which is fantastic and great fun. And what's happening next, and obviously they do other sequels and the TV shows and stuff that I haven't seen.
I haven't seen anything.
But I just love that end bit of like, this film could potentially have infinite possibilities.
It feels like a world I'd love to see more of. It's very fleshed out.
And we just haven't.
Yeah, we're just lazy.
We're just too lazy.
I want to see it, but no. But what about you?
It's
Final thoughts?
visually brilliant.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful film. But yeah, I thought it was dense, but I think repeated viewings and probably watching the sequels and reading the manga and stuff will probably make me appreciate what they're tackling. And like stuff.
Yeah, for me, I had a very similar issue, which is,
It's sort of like, I was thinking about when I first watched The Matrix, I mean, a very long time ago, but like, I didn't quite get it when I first watched it, even though in comparison, The Matrix is really simple in comparison to Ghost in the Shell, but now when I watch The Matrix, it's like, oh yeah, I know where they're going, and I really appreciate what they did with it. So I think Ghost in the Shell is another one of those films where it's like, second time through, I'll probably catch up and actually go, oh, that's what they're talking about, and then really...
Yeah, I agree for most part. I think it's a beautiful film. It just, for me, the dialogue really, and the characters didn't really connect with me. I didn't feel, I liked the issue they were tackling. I thought they tackled it quite intelligently and with a bit of exposition here and there, but that's unavoidable, I suppose. But yeah, so anyway, we'll move on to what we've been watching. So, Tom, anything else you've been watching? I know you've watched Room and Spotlight recently, but other than that,
I watched Clerks and Clerks 2.
Okay.
Which are very good.
I haven't actually gotten around to
for
watching
me,
them.
Clerks 1, like it's got really amateur production values, but it shows the power of the script. Because the script's so good, you get engaged with the characters. So I think, like, you think about The Revenant, like, it's all... So I keep bashing The Revenant, but, like, it's like a visually breathtaking film, but because the story's not there, you're just not invested as much. Whereas Clerks, really low production values, great characters, great story, you really invest in it.
Have you watched either Revenant?
Yeah, I haven't watched The Revenant. Have you watched Clerks with your dictionary out so you can look up all the words that come up on the screen?
No, I haven't done that.
Great fun and very telling of it. And the script, and even the way they changed the script, like, because they could only get the shop at night.
Yeah.
So they added in the bit of someone jamming gum in the locks of the thing, so that's why it's always dark in there.
Yeah.
And like those little bits that go with it, and adding the shoe polish joke, and like so many little things that become recurrent over the course of the film to make it really funny.
You ever work in retail as well?
You know exactly what it feels like.
I know that customer.
Yeah. The guy with the lung just turns up. Like, there's so many crazy little moments.
I haven't actually watched Clerks, but
there's no spoilers in that, so you're all right.
I have watched a scene from Clerks on YouTube. They're talking about the Death Star and essentially, how many contractors died in the Death Star and how
it's a really good film. Didn't like 2 as much as the first one. I liked the number 1 had a freshness to it, but 2 is good.
I found that two's watchable.
It's like because they had all like more money to spend on it. It was like, look, we're in colour now. And everything.
But they also
was the first one not in colour?
It was in black and white.
Oh, really?
They couldn't afford colour.
And it really adds to the. It really adds to it. To the film.
Yeah,
it's just great.
Clerks is kind of consistently funny, and Clerks 2 has like 3 excruciatingly hilarious jokes in it. But the rest of the film is kind of a little bit more dud, but it's just interesting seeing it because they did do it a long time
because you like the characters
as
well, though. So you're still invested in it because you like the characters, even though most of them are assholes and idiots.
From what I've heard, Clerks 1 doesn't really have a plot so much as it's just it's just events. It's just. So,
a day in the life.
But it's really
okay. I'll give it. I think it's on Netflix. If I'm correct.
And City of God as well, which I watched a few weeks ago.
Okay.
Which is fantastic.
Especially
for editing as well. There's some fantastic use of editing in that film.
Okay, I'll get to that. What were you, Kieran?
I've been watching Supergirl.
Any good?
I've been really enjoying it.
I want to ask something. So is Supergirl, Flash, Arrow? Is there one more? No, there's some Days of
Gotham.
Legends of Tomorrow.
And Gotham. They're all in the same.
I think so.
Okay.
I think Supergirl's is different.
Supergirl's in the same universe as Man of Steel.
Oh, is it?
Green Arrow, Flash, and Legends of Tomorrow are all in the same universe.
And Gotham's Gotham's in the
I
past.
do not know about it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in the past, and I don't know about it.
Okay, so are you watching any of the other DC TV shows? Because
I've been told to watch Green Arrow and Flash several times.
I've been told to watch Green Arrow.
I think they're both a little bit too far on for me to jump in. I need like a couple of weeks off to do that.
Yeah, I've never been really interested in the DC shows, but I've always wanted to watch Arrow. But the others haven't really, shouted out to me. Yeah,
Legends of Tomorrow is on now, so I'm watching that as well. That's
How's
okay. It's quite good.
Yeah, I know it's got
interesting.
It's got Arthur Darvill in it, who I
Arthur
quite
Darvill,
like.
who's finally playing a Time Lord, and it's got the guy from Prison Break doing a hilarious accent, which you kind of get used to about 5 episodes in, I think, and I'm sort of getting used to it. But Supergirl's really good. It's very different, a little bit cheesy, but not too cheesy.
Yeah, I'm surprised it exists. So it exists in the kind of DC cinematic universe.
Yeah, sort of.
Wow. Okay. I would have thought it had its.
Yeah, it seems so light because with the DC films they're going like, oh, it's dark.
Yeah.
So Supergirl seems really light and friendly.
It's light. It's not as friendly. And it does ask some good questions, and it's like quite relationship orientated. But it's just like with her friends and her boss, and then like the sort of Tony Stark-esque character, and it does that sort of thing, which is quite good. And like because she's the cousin of Supergirl, and she's supposed to protect him, but because of time dilation she arrives too late to protect him at all, and he has to protect her for not really protect, but like a couple of moments where he helps out. So it's like your purpose of being somewhere where you're not supposed to be is removed. What do you then do? And it's quite interesting.
Okay, yeah. What channel is it on? Or where are you watching it? Oh, right.
I'm watching it buying it on Google Play.
Okay. Well, yeah. I've been watching the Akira Kurosawa films. I got a box set.
Oh yeah. I saw that.
Yeah. I've watched all of the ones in the box set except Seven Samurai.
I want to watch that one.
Yeah, it's a 3-hour film, so it's finding the time really. Because the other ones, there's Throne of Blood, which I think is the shortest out of all of them, which is around 80 minutes, and it's essentially, I think that one's just Macbeth, or is it? No, it's Macbeth. But in instead of medieval people, it's samurais.
その森に囲まれ猛襲の霧渦を巻く城蜘蛛の巣城権力の座その権力の座を争う者そしてそれを血であがなった者の末路は血で血を洗う戦国絵巻
So we're going to wrap up now. So Kieran, what have you? Is there a place we can find you on the web, or is there?
You can find me on Twitter at SoundOTMA.
And that'll be in the description.
That'll be in the description, and you can follow or listen to my podcast at www.spepodcast.com and subscribe there.
Okay, and Tom, again, you're a student.
I'm a student. I have no online presence.
So you don't exist.
I don't exist online. You can find me on Facebook.
This is your online presence. This is the beginning.
This is the beginning. Yeah, Steve Jobs and the other guy.
The other guy. Well, I don't know. Seth Rogen.
Working in the garage.
No,
Seth Rogen.
Yeah. Yeah. Steve Jobs and Seth Rogen.
Michael Fassbender and Steve Rogen. No.
Anyway, so yeah, I've been doing some camera work here and there, and I'm obviously host the Deep Focus podcast, which is weekly, and there'll be some reviews on the channel every now and then. And the next week we'll be talking about the social networks. So join us then, and from us, have a good day. Bye bye.
Bye bye.